Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Obi-Thorin Alliance. And what are we doing in today's video, Jake?
We are ranking our Marvel Phase 4 movies. There are 7.
So if you want to see what our ranking is and what gets number 1, stick around. So, MCU Phase 4. So the 7 movies we've included that are included in Phase 4. We've already given an overview of it and discussed the shows and how we would rank those. So now we're moving on to the movies.
Yeah.
If you watched our other video, you might have a rough idea of what we did like, but here you're going to get your official ranking. So, Shang-Chi. This movie was... I didn't find it that exciting. It was nice to see a different type of hero, something, from an oriental background. Did have some good fight scenes, but ultimately I didn't quite understand where the powers of the rings came from and what he could actually do with them. So entertaining, but lacked a good storyline, really. So that's sitting at number 7 for me. What have you got number 7?
Number 7 is Black Widow, and I think the main problem with this movie is that it came out at the wrong time, and it very much feels like a video game. It's beat for beat, action scene, some story development, and it just is very not ambitious enough. It doesn't take any chances or any story things that we didn't already know. Basically, we found out how she got her jacket in Avengers Infinity War, what we didn't really need to know, and the villain's generic. She had plot holes of why she survived, and she could survive falling off jumping while she was flying off midair without a parachute. What would not happen, and I still don't believe that would not happen. Taskmaster was cool. Red Guardian is the best thing about this movie, but the negatives weigh more than the positives, and I just don't like this movie out of all the other ones, and that's why it's at number 7.
Okay, so moving on to number 6 for me, I've gone The Eternals. This leaves more questions than answers, to be honest. I don't quite understand how they fall in line with, especially what's moving into Phase 5. I don't mind their justification of why they didn't step in with fighting Thanos, but I just don't quite get, is there multiple Eternals across different multiverses? I feel like it had too many characters in it. Its storyline is an interesting concept, I'll give it that, but I feel like it wasn't overly entertaining and kind of dragged on, but the storyline was okay. It's a fine movie, but in comparison to some of the other MCU movies we've got in the past, it falls pretty low for me. It's also, and as I said, it's left with more questions than answers, so I'm confused more after seeing this movie.
My number 6 is Shang-Chi, and I got to give credits with the Mandarin. I think the villain is the best aspect of the movie, but the hero for me, it's off enough. He doesn't stand out, in my opinion. This movie, to me, it copies quite a lot from Iron Man and Black Panther, and unfortunately, if it wasn't for the Mandarin, I think this would be last. I know a lot of people love Shang-Chi, and yes, it's cool in a way, but we get this CGI fight at the end that wasn't really that good, and then we do get to see Abomination and Wong, but there's nothing that really stands out in this movie besides the Mandarin, and the story is fine, but with the 10 rings, we don't really understand how they work. Still need some clarification on that, and I am looking forward to Shang-Chi too, but not as much as other hero storylines. Yeah.
So moving to number 5, I've got Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. This movie, I get the importance of it, and it did change because of what had happened to the actor in real life, but necessary adding or origin story of a character that we, for no reason really. I do like the fact that they've passed the mantle over, but they've kind of created a villain or an anti-hero just for the sake of allowing that to happen, where It probably could have been just part of a team up movie where, he passed away and then she took over. They didn't probably need a whole movie about it. It felt extremely long. It was a long movie, but it felt double the length of what it really was. And visually, I think it lacked. I've talked about it in our review about Black Panther. I was quite disappointed with the underwater scene. I think it, in comparison to Aquaman and how that was shot underwater, I think this just doesn't visually look as good. So Wakanda Forever sits at number 5.
My number 5 is the Eternals, and I think this movie, out of all the other projects, is the most ambitious one. But unfortunately, the ambition of the movie is its downfall because it introduces so much, but there's so much confusion with, like what Luke says. Is there more Eternals? What's going on with everything? And I really enjoyed this movie because it was different and unique, but I'm more confused because of what the Eternals brings to the MCU. And maybe with the Eternals 2, there will be more clarification, but I really liked their ambition and felt like the MCU was really trying something different and new. If we were doing what we thought was the most ambitious movie, the Eternals would be number 1, but this is a ranking, and yeah.
So number 4, I've got Thor: Love and Thunder. This power of having Thor in it. It also had the team up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. It was very funny, overly funny, like too much humor, which is what hurt it. But ultimately, I did laugh throughout and was entertained thoroughly, and I quite liked the idea of the god destroyer and what the whole premise of that, and the ending was somewhat predictable. I think they probably could have went about it a different way and probably still got a very similar result. But then again, we're left now with Thor and him being a father, so I think it's quite cool. So I'm happy with that. The quite sad what happened with Jane, but added her, and we got to see what Lady Thor would be like. So overall, entertaining. Just too much comedy, which has hurt it in terms of ranking. But number 4 is still a good result.
I'm going to agree. Number 4 for me is Thor: Love and Thunder. In a way, I think this is the most energetic and enthusiasm Marvel movie, but in another way, you could argue the comedy destroys this movie. So it's very much the most middle ground with the MCU movies. Unfortunately, I feel like they wasted Christian Bale's performance as the villain. They basically showed him in the beginning becoming this god killer, and then we didn't get to see him kill the villains. And then with the Guardians in the movie, they weren't really in it that much. And then with all the stuff happening, like what Luke said, the ending didn't really feel satisfying, but Thor did become a father. And overall, the movie is fine. I think it's how you see it. If you're really much a critical comic book person, I think you hate this movie. But if you're someone that loves the Marvel movies, I think you enjoyed it. So it's very much a middle movie.
So moving to number 3, I've gone with Black Widow, which Jacob had much further down the list. I actually thought this movie was really different. I like where it fitted in the timeline. I just think it had a very, very cool story. That's what I liked about it. It was one of the first releases where it wasn't really a cinematic release. It got put on Disney Plus because of COVID. I don't know if that made it a different experience for me, but I enjoyed having people around and sitting and watching it as a group. It had a good amount of action. It was funny. I actually do really like the premise of the Black Widows, and to me, it explained. I always questioned why Natasha Romanoff as Black Widow was important or even an Avenger, but this movie kind of explained it to me, and I quite liked that. And it to me, it made her a more meaningful character. It was far-fetched with the jumping out of a falling craft and the fact that the villain's kind of spaceship was kind of hovering and not seen. That doesn't add up, but beyond that, I actually liked the rest of the story. I also liked the introduction of the Red Guardian and the comedy aspect he added with him and his feud that he had with Captain America and the stories he had to tell. So I thought it was really different as something. You said that the Eternals was the most ambitious. I actually think for me, I thought this was the most ambitious attempt, and I quite like what the finished product was.
Indeed. Number 3 for me is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. For me, I feel like this movie was the most emotional movie. Definitely had me crying in the movies. But what let it down for me and why it's not in the top 2 is with its storytelling. It felt very long and boring, unfortunately. Unlike Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, you're enjoying every scene with how it goes. And with this movie, you're looking at your watch and seeing what time it is. But with the storyline, it is quite an amazing movie. Would it been better with Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa if he was still alive? Yes, I do think so. I personally don't like Shuri as much, but as a movie as a whole, it was cinematically very impressive. It was filmed very well. The villain is interesting and is cool, but personally, I think every villain that is not Kane is kind of a waste of time. They're B grade villains. Kane is the main villain. And overall, it's a satisfying movie, but definitely not as strong as the top 2.
So number 2, I've gone with Doctor Strange. The latest release of Doctor Strange, I thought was very, very cool. It's different. It really built on from what happened in WandaVision. I like the idea of seeing the different multiverses. It's introduced us to a new character in America, Chavez, and that was quite cool.
America.
Yeah, you watch our video on that. I think it's quite funny that they've gone with that name. I like that they took a risk in making it kind of like a horror film. It was very gory, which is something they haven't really done before. I like the journey that Wanda goes on with being, she is a villain, but she's not a villain, and she's swapped from being, once, being used for evil, then helping out the Avengers to then now kind of having her heart broken, going through what went through in WandaVision, and then still being like, I don't want to bring harm to people, I just want to be a mother. And I think it's a really cool storyline that you can believe, and the show has built that up. So there's very few flaws in Doctor Strange to me. I think it was really enjoyable. I saw it at the movies 3 times, I think. It really great, and it was fairly long but didn't feel that way. The only criticism is America character, but then that allowed them to explain the multiverses, and yeah, so it was required, but it was odd. So number 2, that's what I've gone with.
My number 2 is the same, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I just loved how they told a villain's perspective, but it was just a mother wanting a family, and that's a pretty cool storyline. And I know a lot of people don't like the movie as much. More ambitious and showed us more, but I think we will be getting that in the 3rd movie. And I do think America lets it down, and I guess you could argue it's kind of her origin story, and we didn't get to see Doctor Strange as much, but if we didn't get her, we wouldn't have been able to go in the multiverse. But overall, I think it's a fantastic movie. It does so many things well. We've seen, RRT, seen so many, and overall, I think it's a great Marvel movie, and very much looking forward to Doctor Strange in the future.
So that leads to number 1. So I believe we both have the same number 1. There's only one movie left, so we may as well introduce it. So what's number 1, Jacob?
Spider-Man No Way Home.
So Spider-Man No Way Home, this is what I liked about it. It got what we asked for. We wanted to see the Spider-Man characters cross over. We got the meme that, everyone knows Spider-Man's pointing at each other. I actually thought it was quite emotional at times in the movie. I think it built on well from the last Spider-Man, and Peter Parker being framed as being evil and killing Mysterio, everything to go back to normal, but then at that, it was the consequence of wiping people's memories, and then, in the end now he's kind of, people don't even know what he is, so where does that go from here? So I'm very intrigued to see how the story builds from Spider-Man, and it's also potentially close the door if they don't make any more because of the whole Marvel Sony dispute. So it ticked a lot of boxes, and it's a thoroughly entertaining movie with Easter eggs galore. I don't know of any other movie where crossover characters from the same thing, they're all Spider-Man, but it's different versions of Spider-Man connected together. Like, we complain about Batman's, how many versions there are of Batman, but we've not seen them cross over or even know how that could work. But this allowed us to do that, and I just think it's very, very cool. And it's exactly what people wanted, and I think it's an almost perfect movie for me. What did you like about it?
I just loved how it told a story, an ordinary story, and then brought all of what we loved with all the villains coming back from Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and bring everything together. It was the best cinema experience. Excellent story. The Easter eggs, just everything all came together. It was amazing storyline. I know you could argue it did rely on cameos and nostalgia, but I think it worked for this movie. Out of all the other MCU movies, the story was amazing. Everything worked. Yeah. Unlike any other MCU movie, I don't see any problem with Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah, I like the interaction between the three Spider-Mans, and when they worked out, like, oh yeah, my girlfriend's MJ and mine's this and that, and they all had an Uncle Ben and the Aunt May, and and seeing how they connected, and it was very cool, and especially for me seeing Tobey Maguire come back. I haven't actually seen the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, so it didn't mean much to me, but seeing Tobey Maguire come back was very, very special.
Yeah. Well, thank you for watching. Also, comment down below what your 7 movies are. Be curious to know. Give us feedback on our list. As always, there's videos at the end. As always, you are awesome. Let the force be with you. Catch you in the next